Hello everyone and Happy New Year. My name is Siana Bangura and I'm a writer, blogger and poet from London. And on May the 21st, I've got a book coming out called Elephant. Elephant is a collection of poetry. It's my debut collection. And in terms of the title, why elephant, I hear you say, well, firstly, actually, anyone who knows me knows that I've got a thing for elephants. They're my favourite animal. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it's something to do with these myths about them being very wise and very good with remembering, having a long-term memory. And I think the very spirit with which I've written this collection and put it together is very much to kind of address the elephant, or rather the elephants, in the room and look them square in the eye and start having important conversations. And I think, you know, having us remember these conversations and the lessons that we learn from those conversations. Although I have never known you, you have always lived in me. My sweet home, Sierra Leone. That's a kind of the opening, because that's where it all starts, you know, in a place called Freetown, Sierra Leone. It's the start of my journey. And this collection is semi-autobiographical. It's not, but I wouldn't say it's about me as such, but it's definitely rooted in a lot of my experiences from migration and being a migrant and coming to the UK with my mum from Sierra Leone, to having a very black British girlhood and kind of all the things that came with, and then going to university and also dealing with boys and dealing with just other people and dealing with employment and unemployment and also kind of right through to the present day, really. I think there's a lot of issues there, dealing with loss. I talk about the family a lot. I talk about love, but it's very political too. And I would say that, I mean, you know, a lot of the very important conversations are about black womanhood. It very much shapes my entire existence. And so you can see that's a very strong theme in Elephant, actually. Elephant is split into 10 parts, and those 10 parts each relate to the kind of key themes in the collection. And in part one, we have, you know, poems about migration, about Sierra Leone, I suppose, about my mum as well. And actually, another key poem is called Girlhood, Womanhood, Motherhood / Mum. And it goes like this. Touchdown on foreign land, leaving all we knew behind. Children of Freetown, feeling every sound and tasting everything. She herself was young, 23, and carrying a baby. Passport green, she came to meet him. How it must feel to leave all that you know behind, forever, enduring space and time. Brave and fearful all at once, adventure some, but necessity more. She is yours, and you are hers, and you will need each other more than ever on British soil. And so that poem is definitely about my journey here with my mother from Freetown, Sierra Leone, about 22 years ago. And this idea of who could have known what our lives would be. And I think, you know, there's always this hope that you will go home again when you leave. This idea of assuming you will return as well, and not knowing what lies ahead, basically, and how much you will need each other more than ever on British soil, a soil that is often hostile to migrants, often hostile to people who are different, actually. So anyway, that poem was kind of just about that particular journey. And I remember the first time I performed it with my mum in the audience, she got a little emotional, so that was quite sweet. But yes, that poem is, I guess it's just really, obviously it's quite autobiographical, but I think it's just, again, quite pertinent at the moment because of the fact that we're hearing a lot about kind of immigration, migration, and all that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, a lot of the poems in Elephant are, I suppose, quite topical. because some of these things we've been talking about for a long time and we're still talking about them. So the next poem in the first section of Elephant is called The Stranger, and actually in many ways, particularly in the first section, the poems are very linked. So obviously we've had the poem before it about migration, and in there, you know, Passport Green, she came to meet him, and then I go into a poem called The Stranger, which is about an encounter that I had 2 years ago with my father, essentially, who I've not seen in a very long time. Anyway, I bumped into him and it wasn't a good experience, and I think I then wrote this poem essentially about him, essentially about the very idea of him and this idea of fatherlessness. And I think definitely it was influenced actually by Dean Atter's Fatherless Nation. That is one of my favourite poems. I think it's so beautiful, and it encapsulated my feelings so well as well. So I do thank Dean for that poem. But this poem, it starts off a gut feeling, you might call it. I looked at the stoop Mum used to sit on after every time you beat her. Audacious. You live in the flat that she built as the family home and replaced us with another. And the little girl whose hand you hold so tight as you walk down Long Lane and walk away again. She does not know that within you is a cold, calculating, evil monster, and that for years, just down the road, she had a couple of sisters and a brother. So that's the first poem actually that was written for Elephant. So that is the oldest poem in the collection, shall we say. And obviously those first few lines just kind of describe the encounter that I had. And actually, come to think about it, again, I think a key influence would have been Daddy by Sylvia Plath. That poem, again, is one of my loves, like a favourite poem of mine. I think because it's so like the kind of mythology aspect is really interesting, and as you read The Stranger, there's a lot of that kind of mythological kind of thing going on. So mentions of Medusa and Satan, this idea of mythology and kind of creating a character because you're filling this void with a character, shall we say. So yeah, in that poem, you know, that's definitely that was my very first poem that I actually performed ever to like a live audience at a night called Poetry Love, and it got a lot of love and emotion, and you know, and so I think that's when I realised that, I'm gonna really take this poetry thing seriously. So yes, that poem was important to have in there, definitely, and again, that kind of continues with the chronicling of the journey. So the next poem in part 1 is called Nomad Blood. It's funny because often my friends always say they can't keep up with me. Where in the world am I now? And I don't get to travel internationally as much as I'd like to, but I certainly travel between different cities quite a lot, particularly between Coventry and London. It's essentially this idea of me always spending a lot of time travelling and moving and being on trains, and this idea of kind of moving through place to place with a destination in mind, but also with not necessarily an end in sight. The first lines of Nomad Blood are, I live on trains and moving things, city dweller beneath the skin, living off earth and beautiful things. And I think what I meant by that is just this idea, I spend a lot of time kind of moving, and I get to see a lot of people, see a lot of different places, and I'm quite a people watcher too. So I think it's this idea of when I'm on the train, often I read or I write or I just kind of sit there really, and it's one of the few moments I guess I have to rest actually. So the final poem in section 1, in part 1, is called Passport. This poem actually is part of a series I wrote for the Black British Girlhood exhibition that took place in London a while back. And this poem is definitely sort of based on an experience I had when I was younger on my way to Germany for a school trip. It's kind of based on that, but obviously I've used my artistic license too. But it's this idea of being othered, and this idea of, you know, when you're a child, you just want to be like the other children. You just want to be like everybody else, unless you also do want to be an individual, but particularly in the earlier years, you want to just be like everybody else. And this idea of not being able to be like everybody else because of your passport being a very concrete, a very solid, a very legal thing that certifies that you are an other. And it's just chronicling that kind of experience, actually. And it goes like this. Do you know what a black hole looks like? It's a vast expanse, the type I always prayed to be engulfed by, the type of ocean I wish to jump into and to sink, not swim in. And you work hard to assimilate. That's part of the plight of an immigrant. Short of scrubbing your colour off with wire sheets and bleach, you abandon your culture and language and close your ears when the motherland speaks. And you're embarrassed by aunties who wear their Sunday bests out proudly, lest we forget that they are African like you. And so, that poem, as I said, is definitely about being an other. And I think I do really remember when I was younger being, it's so terrible to say, but being embarrassed actually when I used to see, you know, beautiful African aunties, often Nigerian aunties actually, on Sunday in their amazingly wonderful gowns, you know, in their amazingly wonderful African attire. And I think I just really felt uncomfortable because they, in doing that, they were drawing attention to me and my otherness as well. And I felt that way for a really long time. I was like, why can't they just dress normally? Why can't they just dress like everybody else, kind of thing? And again, that's definitely a poem exploring that being uncomfortable within your own skin. And I'm definitely not like that anymore. But yeah, I really do remember that being a bit embarrassed by the aunties looking absolutely wonderful in their Sunday best. I don't know, it's definitely part of it's a wider collection actually, which that particular collection as well chronicles my girlhood, shall we say, and definitely coming into my own and moving away from feeling uncomfortable in my blackness to finding some kind of redemption, I'd say. So that was an overview of part 1 of Elephant, the beginning. Very much an exploration of this idea of migration, of otherness, of not being comfortable in one's own skin, of not being comfortable with one's own blackness. And that's definitely something I dealt with when I was younger. Those are things I was struggling with at that kind of period in my life. And it sets us up very nicely for part 2. But thank you for watching the first episode of Elephant Diaries, and look out for the next one. But for now, see you later.